All right. Hi, guys. My name is Lauren House. I am the hostess of the show Beyond the House, and we're on the social Nostra network. And today I have somebody who I'm very excited to introduce everyone to. She is an author, a speaker, and the co-creator of the Personal Development School. Her name is Thais Gibson, and I stumbled across her YouTube videos about 6 months ago, just going down my traditional rabbit holes of trying to find help and someone to relate to. And I saw something, I don't know what the initial video was, but obviously the title of it caught my attention and I just immediately was drawn to her. Everything she said resonated with me. It made me think, it got me to where I felt comfortable because she has such a sweet demeanor and I just love the way that she presents herself. So this is Thais Gibson. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate it.
You are welcome. So do you want to give us like a little background of what you do? You probably can describe it better than I can.
Yes. So basically I ran a one-to-one practice for the better part of a decade and like really loved that work, but just had a big sort of long wait list and ended up creating the Personal Development School. So now we have a series of online courses. There's about 40 or so in the school. We do like 4 live webinars each week. We have trained coaches underneath us who come and like facilitate social events and all that kind of stuff for our community. And that's basically what I do full time. And that came very much out of like a very personal journey of going through attachment trauma and addiction and all kinds of struggles. And then seeing that there was like this really deep healing that happened within me by really targeting things at the subconscious level. And I think my natural impulse is I'm a bit of a sharer. So like the moment I was like healing and getting results after trying so many things, it was like everybody, like I needed to just somehow find a way of sharing things. And so that was sort of the evolution that took me to where we are today.
That's actually really cool. And I can't say it enough. So many people are going through the same thing that we are all going through. And sometimes they can't put it into words. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to turn to. No offense. I love my friends and family, but they don't give the best advice because they don't quite understand what the deep rooted issue is. So you end up having all these, I'm sure, just thoughts in your head thinking you're going in the right direction. And it takes time. You have to stop and pause and be okay with being alone and going through and understanding all the trauma that you've been through and then how to change it and implement it so that moving forward, you're a better person. You can take in all the information you want, but if you're not implementing, then it doesn't do anything. So
100%. And like one of the biggest things I noticed too, going through the whole journey is when we're trying to reprogram things, like there's this thing that says the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. So we can do all this stuff at like the conscious level and be like, oh, I'm going to start this new habit or I'm going to do this new thing. But unless we actually program it into ourselves, then it's hard for it to really stick. And we program through repetition. And sometimes we need to like take a pause and be alone and go inwards and focus on ourselves in order to be able to repeat things enough that they really go into us at the subconscious level.
And that's not easy to do. That's always a mirror that you don't want to look in.
Absolutely.
So my main question stems from, we all know, if anyone who's ever done any sort of deep research into why we are the way we are, we all know that it stems from childhood trauma. And this question comes from my own experience and on behalf of all of my girlfriends. We all say that we were a certain person up to a certain relationship. And then as an adult, this romantic relationship, no matter how long or short it is, takes this toll on you. And it's disgusting. It's toxic and it's mentally, emotionally, verbally abusive. It's a lot of things that just tear you down to your core and you come out of it like not knowing who you are, having zero self-confidence. You don't think you're good enough, worth it, anything. So how can a secure person who, let's just say that they grew up in a great family environment, how does an adult relationship, which you have full control of, turn you into a different attachment style?
Yeah. So basically you want to look at the subconscious mind as being like plastic. Like we have neuroplasticity, things change. It's a great question. And what happens is like we can come and we can go through life and have a secure upbringing. Number one, everybody goes through a little bit of trauma to a certain degree. The system of classical conditioning is traumatic because it teaches us love is conditional. And you come into the world as this little being and you're unconditionally loving and unconditionally basically dependent on caregivers at the time. And then when love is withheld or caregivers are withdrawing or you go through punishment reward, like it's a little bit traumatic for everybody no matter what. But we can still be securely attached and then grow up, and then our attachment style can change because if whatever we're exposed to is repetitive and elicits an emotional response, repetition plus emotion reprograms. So it doesn't matter, like we can have the most secure upbringing ever, but if we end up in a relationship with somebody who is toxic, who is maybe narcissistic or, any one of those things, then the repeated exposure to somebody putting you down, telling you're not good enough, making you doubt yourself, question yourself, all those different things, that's going to leave an imprint because it's actually reprogramming your entire identity at a subconscious level. And so that's why it's so important that we're aware of our relationships and how we choose them and our non-negotiables and how they impact us, because truly nothing really spills onto us and affects us at the subconscious level like our primary sort of caregiver in our adult lives, which actually happens to be our romantic partner.
Okay. So would you say, I don't know if you know this, but what is the difference, or do you touch on the difference between PTSD and reprogramming? Like, can you reprogram? Because I always joke with my friends, I'm like, oh, it's my PTSD from that shitty relationship. But I don't know, like I work very hard on changing who I am for the better and not letting the new person, for example, deal with the old baggage. So my question is like, is that PTSD or is that just being very aware and catching yourself before you go down that old imprinted rabbit hole? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying like, did your attachment style change or do you have PTSD? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
It can be one or the other. So, I mean, it can technically be both. So usually when we go through relationships, it's more like if it's a really traumatic relationship, we're most likely to have something more close to CPTSD, like chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, because PTSD will sort of be like, and it can be both, or it can be still PTSD, but you'll see with PTSD, it's usually one or a couple major traumas. Like we would think of like PTSD after a car accident, like a single event. CPTSD would be more like chronic low-level traumas that are repeated, but still traumatic. And that, can actually be more challenging in the sort of perspective or under the fact that like our whole paradigm at a subconscious level changes. So it will really depend on like the intensity of the relationship. If somebody's in an extremely abusive relationship, oh my goodness, of course they're going to come out with it with CPTSD, like literally. But what we have to remember is that we were programmed by that person, and by the same principles that we were programmed by our repeated exposure and conditioning as a result of the relationship, we can deprogram or reprogram ourselves. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it's an extremely important thing to do so that we can take our identity back and we can heal and thrive and have healthy future relationships. And that really consists of, like I often tell people, let's say somebody's 8 years old and they have some kind of childhood trauma at 8. And now let's say they're 38 and they're looking at their lives and they're going, I'm still struggling with that thing that happened to me when I was 8. We have to ask ourselves, like, how is it still with us 30 years later? How is it still there? Because the past isn't here. So like, how is the experience still here? And what happens is two things. Number one, we give meaning to the event and then we keep that meaning about ourselves. So we go, oh, when I was 8 years old, this thing happened and that makes me weak and helpless and powerless. And as long as we've been retelling that story on autopilot over and over again, then that's still going to show up in the way we are living and our programming and everything else. And so we have been re-traumatizing ourselves for 30 years on autopilot, if that's the case. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens from the alternate perspective, which is usually painful events leave us with really deeply unmet needs. And then we have no modeling or context a lot of the time for how to meet those needs. We also keep ourselves in a state of re-traumatization by having these things we hunger for so deeply and then not being able to meet them in the relationship to ourselves or advocate for them from others. And so when we're trying to heal trauma, and CPTSD, PTSD, really what it requires is like isolating what are those programs that are creating this in the first place? What are the painful stories I have about myself left over from that relationship that was victimizing or really painful? Did I make it mean I'm weak, I'm helpless, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy of love? Like, what were those beliefs? And then we do the reprogramming work on those. And then what were the biggest unmet needs from that relationship? And then we have a duty to meet those needs in the relationship to ourselves. And that's actually how we deprogram that painful cycle that was put on us in the first place.
So I'm assuming that people have a hard time maybe admitting, and that probably is coming from their ego, that they feel unworthy of love. Like they might just see it as anger. They might just see it as frustration. They might just see it as, I don't know, like some sort of surface level damage versus the deeper, bigger picture of what it truly is. And then I do think that taking that step, because there is a reason why you end up choosing that toxic person for some way, shape, or form, I would think, because of your childhood trauma.
So almost always, and like it's tough for people to admit this sometimes, so I kind of like I won't say this unless I'm asked, but usually what happens is even if somebody's securely attached or thinks they're securely attached, if they're in an abusive relationship to begin with, the honest like root of the problem is usually not the person that they were exposed to. There's usually something deeper going on first that led them to that experience. And here's how you can know this. Like our subconscious mind really wants to maintain a comfort zone. So it really wants to like hold on to what's familiar because it sees familiarity equals safety and safety equals survival. And so when we first meet people, we might think like, oh, it's hard to get to know somebody quickly. And how are we going to have these like impressions of people so fast? Our conscious mind processes like 40 to 60 bits per second of data. Our subconscious mind processes 1 billion bits per second of data. So like the things we're aware of consciously versus the things we're aware of subconsciously upon like first meeting somebody are tremendously different. And we are building like an entire web of information about somebody in the first like 10 seconds of meeting them. How long they made eye contact, the way they looked at us, their body language towards us, their tone of voice, their micro expressions, like everything. And we're really picking up on like somebody, and if they're familiar in a way that was, you know, related to our past, then we're going to be interested in them. And we have to look at like when we get into, let's say, abusive relationships, I've never seen an exception to this rule yet. And I've worked with literally so many women on these things. When people are in an abusive relationship, first, their alarm bells aren't going off. Like why, when they meet somebody who's abusive, who's toxic, who's critical, who's rude, all these different things, why are there not these major alarm bells that are like, oh my God, run in the opposite direction. This person's really unhealthy. Well, usually because at a subconscious level, they have already had some familiarity with being that person in the relationship to themselves. So they're very critical of themselves. They put themselves down. They disrespect their own boundaries. They don't speak up. They don't think they're worthy of having their needs met or opinions heard. And so they meet this toxic figure and they feel all this attraction. And really a big part of it is the subconscious mind building out this big web of information and going, oh, this person's so familiar. And like, what an attractive person. And ooh, I love the way that they, you know, have all these butterflies. And a lot of the time it's reflecting really important information, which is if our alarm bells are not going off around toxic people, then there's definitely some stuff that we have to do to reprogram our subconscious as well. And I'm not like victim blaming in any way. Like women, men, people absolutely are victims of abusive relationships. And like, you need to leave immediately if anybody's in that situation. But it's so important after the fact, when you have that moment to reflect, to go, why didn't my alarm bells go off? Like why at that first moment when the person lied about something big, or the person put me down in a way that like people shouldn't be speaking to other people, or, you know, XYZ, why didn't that come up? Why didn't I register that and leave immediately? Usually because your conscious mind registered, but your subconscious mind was like, ooh, this is familiar. And our subconscious is the one running the show at the end of the day.
Interesting. So does any of that have to do with being honest with yourself? Being honest with yourself about what you see when it happens. It's always easier to see when you break up with somebody. Oh, I saw this. This was a red flag. I shouldn't have done that. Like I totally let him get away with this. Like you see those things, but because your wound is being so nurtured. And then, like you said, that attraction is like a 12 out of 10 that you can't even help it. Your love is blind. So now you have like this blind standpoint that you're coming from, and you think that you're thinking so clearly, but you're not. So is part of it being honest, or do you think you just genuinely don't see the difference?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. There is part of it is being honest, but the problem becomes that people can't be honest. So we have this mechanism in our brain. It's called the reticular activating system, and its job is to like filter out information basically according to what we're focusing on already, our beliefs, and what we need. And when we really need to have this like wound filled or this hole filled or whatever it is, then our reticular activating system actually filters information out. And so if we want to avoid abandonment more than we want to see how the person's treated, like if somebody, let's say the person's extremely critical in an abusive way, and if we want to avoid abandonment more than we want to avoid criticism, we're going to be filtering out that criticism. And so the first step, like we can try to be honest with ourselves, but so many women, I've worked with so many women going through dynamics like this, and like they're trying so hard to be honest with themselves, but they just have all these blind spots and they're not seeing things clearly because the reticular activating system has like a selective perception according to what's going to get their needs met that are prioritized in their hierarchy. And so I think it's so helpful when people are going through that to like first understand what wounds are there, do the reprogramming on those wounds, so then the RAS isn't like selectively filtering things, and then you actually get the opportunity to see things from an honest perspective in relationship to self.
So it's a little bit of both, it sounds like. But you have to do the work first. I mean, everybody, there's like nothing more frustrating to me, and I'm sure you see it more than I do, than my friends who jump from relationship to relationship. And it's such a mask and it doesn't do anything. And at the end of the day, you're still going to have the breakdown, whether it's now in a year or in 10 years, because you're not doing the work that you need to do. But I don't think anybody talks about it. I don't think anybody explains it. I don't think it's okay to do the work on yourself, because now with social media, like everybody just has this place that they're supposed to be perfect and exude perfection. And it just turns into such a different mentality, because you have to keep up with the Kardashians, and behind closed doors, like you're in so much pain and you're having a hard time, and maybe you don't know who to turn to, or I don't know. It just seems like it's like you're in your own vicious cycle that you have to be brave enough to break and do a program like what you offer, because it's not easy. I mean, the first page of it took me a few times to get through the first couple pages. I was like, I don't deal with any of this. And then I was like really thinking about it, and I'm like, yeah, actually, this actually does make sense. You have to be willing to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's beautiful, because there's this willingness that's there, right? To really look. And what that would reflect technically is that you have a higher need right now for like self-growth, introspection, whatever else it might be, than to avoid like looking at yourself honestly. So it's like there's courage in that and bravery in that. And it's one of the most important things I think we ever do in the relationship to ourselves, because like if we don't have a healthy internal relationship, which like who of us ever got taught that properly growing up? Like
nobody. I don't think anybody.
So like we get very limited resources, and then we have to become that for ourselves. We have to become like the parents we didn't have, and we have to be able to move ourselves through like our painful internal dialogue or our unmet needs or all these different things. And I think that's part of like the journey that we're here to take on, is to be able to go through life and be like, what did I not get? Or what were the painful things I did get? And how do I make sure I get rid of them and weed these things out, so that then I'm really prepared for like great things ahead of me to come, and my subconscious mind is willing to receive them, instead of being like, I'm not used to like these beautiful things and like love and vulnerability, and so I'm going to deflect them instead and block them out because it's outside of my comfort zone. So
do you think any of it has to do with maybe not wanting to feel like your parents didn't do a good job? So that's kind of, I read a few books like Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix. I don't know if you've read that, but it's such a good book. And I was single when I did it, and I only did it like all the exercises in the back for as far as I could go as being a single person. But the way he pulls everything together after you read the book is incredible. And it was hard, and I was crying because I'm like, my parents did such a good job, but it's like they only do the best that they can to with the ability that they have or the information that they have. Like you can't teach somebody something that you don't know. And this that you teach is so far beyond most people. Like it really takes such a special person to want to go through this.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate that. And yeah, when it comes to like doing the deep work, it takes a special person, it takes a brave person. It takes somebody who's like, sometimes it takes somebody who had enough. Like I know for myself, this was born out of like, oh my goodness, I'm sick and tired of feeling sick and tired kind of thing. And so like, I will do anything to escape these bad feelings. And there was like the deep dive into the healing. But it takes a lot more courage, I would say, for somebody who's not at like a rock bottom to start the journey in the relationship to themselves. And exactly like you said, I've seen many times over, people are like, oh, I had especially dismissive avoidance, want to be like, oh, I had the perfect childhood. I had a great childhood, the idyllic childhood. And yeah, maybe like food was on the table and, hygiene, clothes were there. That was good. But like, were you emotionally nurtured? Did you have people showing up for you? Did you learn emotional literacy? Did you learn how to set boundaries? Did you learn how to like identify your needs and speak up for them? Did you learn not to tell painful stories about yourself when something bad happens at school? Like there is so much we need to learn as people to feel like we thrive emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all these different ways. And unfortunately, most of our parents just didn't have those tools themselves. So how could they pass them down? But a lot of people feel guilty about looking at their parents and seeing any negative. And that's not what it's about. It's about recognizing imperfections and, like you said, being honest about them.
And hopefully, if you do start your own family, and if you don't, at least you treat your colleagues or your boss or your employees or your friends or your significant other, you take these tools that you're learning about and you apply them to the other people, whether it's your kids or not. Obviously, that would be the most influential, and just try to implement it, and then try to be with somebody and surround yourself with people who agree with this or understand or have an open mind to it. Because I find that like my friends who are a little bit more critical of me, I'm like, you know what? I just don't even want to deal with you. Like if I have something to say to you, it's going to turn into a verbal fighting match instead of like, you know what? I hear you. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. So it's a whole different type of person on a whole different level that you start to attract when you go through this.
Absolutely. And the most interesting part about it is that like as you're doing self-work really in any form, it's like our subconscious mind, again, it's like always coming back to that comfort zone thing. It's like if we look at like anxious, preoccupied attachment style individuals, people who are like the anxious ones in relationships, that like one of the biggest things I see is they have such a hard time receiving love and compliments and validation and reassurance. Like people, even if they have a partner who's reassuring, it doesn't stick. And it's because their subconscious mind is so used to feeling unloved, afraid of abandonment, all these different things. It's actually, the RAS is actually filtering out information. So somebody can be anxious and their partner can go, I love you. I'm here for you. Like I'm not going to leave. And it just spirals. They don't hear it. It doesn't land in the same way because literally we're going, no, that's not part of my identity. I'm the one that gets left. I'm the one that gets abandoned. I'm the one. And so these things, if we don't deal with them, we can't receive the things we want to receive if we haven't gone in and made sure that we've reprogrammed all the barriers to doing so.
I can't. It sounds like it's so much work, and it is a lifetime of work. You can't do it overnight. You can't just escape it. Like it's definitely something that you have to work on, hence the personal development school, or else you would, right? I mean, the amount of people I'm sure that come to you and the amount of people that, bless their souls, stumble along the way. Like it's not easy because you have to go so far back and so far down into the deep, deep core and root of things in order to move forward. But I can only imagine how much better you feel. Like the outcome. I mean, does anybody actually fully ever heal from what would, if you could even put a word to it or a moment, what's a defining moment of like, you've gone through the hard stuff and you can start your new life as your new attachment style?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say usually what we see, so we've been collecting a tremendous amount of data from everybody since we've opened and everything. And what we've seen is if people are completing 2 courses a month, so it's pretty heavy duty, like 2 courses a month, reporting that they finished their workbooks, and then attending at least 1 live webinar a week where we have like integration work for people become securely attached. Over 90% of people have become securely attached under those pretenses within 90 days.
Damn. So look at you. That's awesome.
Yeah, because we fast tracked it. So it's like 100%. There are like there can be so much childhood trauma, but like it's boiling down to the same things. It's boiling down to, okay, and from that I have an abandonment wound, or I have a trust wound, or I have a defectiveness schema or wound, or I have, and so, we can go through 500 times of that happening, but ultimately it's like the wounds and the unmet needs. So we found a way of like boiling down those root core issues and then teaching people really how to do the reprogramming work for themselves. And if people are sticking to it and being consistent for that 90 days, that's why it's like the 2 courses a month, because there's daily practice basically required from that. But literally people are like changing their attachment style around completely just from showing up in the relationship to self. And that doesn't mean like you no longer have negative emotions or that you became this perfect robot or like whatever. It means that you feel 100% comfortable in dealing with triggers. You feel really comfortable with like communicating your needs, believing you deserve to have them. You know that you have boundaries and you start asserting them and sharing them. You can move through conversations effectively when problems do arise. Like it's that you're equipped to deal with life differently. It's not that you are emotionless or you only see positive emotions right. The rest of your life. It's like you're still going to be a human, but you know how to work through things as a human being.
So. Yeah, those damn triggers. I know they get me, man. And I'm like, I thought I healed this. I will say there is only a certain, and maybe you disagree, but I think there's only a certain amount of work you can do on yourself. And you think that you're healed till this point, and then you get into a relationship and it exposes all these things that you couldn't know that were still triggers because you haven't had anyone to trigger you for however long you were single.
100% that happens. And that's where the security comes in, is then you'll have new triggers and new things to work through, but you feel like you can work through them. But I would say life is like that. Like I have done so much work on myself as a person, like so much work. And I would say like, I rarely have romantic relationship triggers. Like I've lived with my partner for 5 or 6 years now. Like we've been together, like very in a good spot, like all that stuff. But I would say like, I find these new things in like business will pop up. And I'm like, I have no idea how to deal with this because I've never dealt with this before. And things will come up and show up for me. And I'm like, okay, so this is showing me I have to practice like trust more. I have to practice surrendering more, or I have to, not trying to control things, or like, I feel like we go through life and we always have new things to learn in different forms. But if we do that inner work and we prepare ourselves, then even when totally new, completely outside of our comfort zone things happen, we can look at them and be like, ooh, this doesn't feel good, but like I am going to buckle down, use the tools and move through whatever the challenge is way more effectively than if we didn't have that sort of equipment going into those things.
Which is what you need in order to pass the universe's test. The universe is always freaking testing me. I'm like, I swear, like, where's my reward now? How many hoops do I have to jump through?
I don't think they end.
But you know what? You don't want them to end. That means that you're stunted. That means you're done. That means that you've learned everything you can learn. And we would wilt away. Totally. It'd be boring. Like,
I agree so much. So much. And I think honestly, like, I think we're probably lucky. I'm sure we both have a big need for growth. And so, there are people who have their highest need is security or something like that. They may not love it in the same way. But I think that like, that's the whole point. That's what we're here. And I find too, and I'm wondering if you find this, I find, and I've seen this in so many people's lives, if we don't get the lesson the first time, the second time it's like a little louder. And then if we didn't get the second time, the third time it's quite a bit louder. And then the fourth time it's like extremely loud. And then if you didn't get it by the fifth time, it's like you're on your butt. Like the universe knocked you over and it's like, we're going to make you pay attention.
How many times do you have to learn? I know, but you're probably similar. I have to go through something myself in order to learn it. I have tried many years. It was my New Year's resolution to like listen to people who have more wisdom in areas that I don't, and try and take it in like a sponge and then apply it when a new situation arises. And I say, okay, like this is what this person has been through. Maybe I should go. And I just am like, like Dory from Finding Nemo. Like I just go through the thing, even though you're not supposed to, because you're one of those people. It's like, well, I'm going to knock on all the doors to see what's going to work. And I might be shitty for a little while along the way, but but it gives you experience. It makes you worn in like an old glove. Like
I used to think when I was young, because my parents would always try to be like, don't learn things the hard way, and then like they were learning things the hard way. Let me tell you. But I would hear that all the time. And then I spend my whole early life learning things the hard way. Like I learned everything the hard way for sure. And it was probably similar to you, like, oh, don't do that. But I'm like going to go do it anyways and see what happens. And I think that those are sometimes the most valuable lessons long-term. Like I think it's harder, but sometimes you get like the real riches out of the lessons and experience that comes with it.
I completely agree with you. And then for sure it's a closed door. There's no more questions.
It reminds me of for sure. It's true. It's true.
Oh, that's funny. I think that was all of my questions. I mean, I love just picking your brain about this because to me, it's just so interesting. And like you said, it's just like endless amounts of information. And obviously, Thais offers a fast track package. I don't know what to call it. Course?
Yeah, set of courses, basically.
Okay.
Yep.
And we will, so her Instagram name should be on her screen and you can sign up. I'm assuming that your Instagram has a link to your website.
Yes. So the Instagram does. And then most of our content is on YouTube as well. So YouTube is Personal Development School Thais Gibson. And like there's free daily content there. We have like an attachment style quiz. And then the Personal Development School has all the courses and all the deep, really intense information in there.
So I have started it. I have been very busy and have not made it a priority. I will be honest, but I did start it. And even just the little bit that I did was kind of mind-blowing. And like I said, I did have that first experience of this doesn't really apply to me, and it was like, I had to come back to it a couple of times. And I'm sure most people have the same thought process. They're like, what does this have to do with anything? So I highly suggest it because I've started it and I watch all of her videos. I think she's great and her information is so good. And even if you think it's not going to apply to you, I still suggest watching it because there's some little golden nugget that you can take away. And even though it might not apply to you, it might apply to someone in your life and it will help you deal with them. I don't know if that's the nicest way to put it, but it will help you understand where somebody else is coming from in a different set of shoes. Maybe we can put it like that.
100%. I love it. I love that.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. That was really fun.
Thank you so much for having me. You're amazing.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And please reach out to Thais's, Instagram page, YouTube, and just like get started with her stuff. And like she said, the free content, start watching it. I promise it will change your life. So thank you so much and have a good day. See you soon.